All right, before you click away, and that's assuming that you actually clicked on this video in the first place, this topic might seem boring at first, but I can assure you it's actually one of the most important topics that we can discuss if you want to have success in the voiceover industry. I would say in the audio world in general, but this video is just about voiceover, but definitely in the audio world for sure. So I received a comment the other day on my Chaotica Eyeball video that stated, "The eyeball did nothing to change the sound of the microphone." I bring this up because this all comes back to ear training and how important it is. I was listening to a podcast one day and there was an ADR engineer talking about back when he was an intern training to become an ADR recording engineer. ADR stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement, which is odd because there's nothing automated about the process pretty much. But it's basically when they're recording audio on a film set and then something goes wrong with the recording and they have to re-record the audio after the fact in a studio instead of on set because they didn't find out until later or they just didn't have time. Anyway, the intern was being quizzed by the lead engineer about what mic they should use, which mic would fit the microphone they used on set the best, which one would match up the best. They ran through a few different mics and finally the lead engineer asked the intern, okay, which one of those microphones was the closest to what we need to use today to match what they did on set? The intern responded with, "I couldn't tell a difference between any of those microphones." Then he went on to say after just a few months of interning with that lead engineer that the differences between those microphones became painfully obvious to him and he couldn't even understand how just a few months back he couldn't hear the differences between those microphones at all. I'll get to how this relates to voice actors in just a moment. But here's the thing, there's a lot of opinions out there, right? Some people love a specific microphone and some people hate the same microphone, blah, blah, blah. And that's a good thing. We're all different, and that's what makes the world an interesting place to live in, is the fact that we're all different. But saying something like, the eyeball did nothing to the audio, or like the previously mentioned story where, the ADR person couldn't hear the difference between the microphones, that's not the same thing as an opinion. That's just not an opinion. That's a lack of training. And it's really, really important to make that distinction here. See, the guy in the podcast actually approached this the correct way by saying, I couldn't hear a difference between those microphones, unlike the guy who commented on my video and said that the eyeball did nothing to change the audio. The guy in the podcast absolutely could have said there was no difference between those microphones at all, and that lead engineer would have been really, really frustrated. But as a voice actor, you spend so much time and money on training and learning the skills and honing your acting chops and learning to listen back to your reads and analyze them and pick the best between the 2 or 3 or 4 or how many ever takes that you're recording, so that when the audition gets sent off that you've sent the best audition that you could have possibly sent, in hopes of you booking the job at the end of the day. That's the whole end goal, is you booking the job. You spend all that time, all that money, and all that training on yourself to be able to hear these reads back and successfully pick the best out of them. So what about your audio? When do you train your ears to hear the difference between microphones, the difference between a professionally treated space versus a space that's only about 50% of the way there? When does that happen? Well, it doesn't. There's no studio or coach that I'm aware of that properly trains voice actors on this, let alone trains them on this, period. And now, don't get me wrong, there's tons of people out there like myself that train voice actors on how to set up their equipment, how to record and edit in their DAW properly, microphone technique, how to use processing like EQ, compression, how to properly treat your home studio, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. But none of that ever goes into ear training specifically. And honestly, the vast majority of voice actors don't want to learn that type of stuff and go that deep. And guess what? They shouldn't have to. That's my opinion. My opinion is I don't think they should or should have to. It's too overwhelming. You're already having to learn all about delivering all kinds of reads, from standard commercial reads to promo to video games, animation, IVR, e-learning, audiobooks, breaking down a script, setting up your website, marketing yourself, setting up your home studio, learning to record and edit in a DAW. You get the idea. Voice actors have a lot of stuff on their plate. They have a lot of stuff to learn. I personally do not think ear training and having to be a full-on audio engineer should be part of, what they have to learn. But unfortunately, some of that is just a necessity these days because that's what we were forced to do just a few years ago. And that's where it's set. It's not going back. That's just the way it is. But the last thing that you want to do is learn the job of an audio engineer, and the most important part of being an audio engineer, ear training. Not only that, but it takes years and years to get good at that. So I say all of that to say, have a good audio professional on speed dial that you can trust to evaluate your audio and your space and give you honest, accurate feedback. And there's a lot of us out here, so just make sure you have one that you trust on speed dial. It can really, really save your butt. And if anyone ever tells you that the Chaotica Eyeball doesn't affect your audio, well, you know what they say.